Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Tonight I am sharing a startling update on a recent case and a number of new encounters and experiences that have come into BBI since our last podcast 2 weeks ago. Now last month I shared what has become a very worrying case that took place in the area of Brigstock in the UK. Now the accounts centred around a missing man who died in mysterious circumstances. And he was found later in conditions that were held back by the coroner, other than the statement that he did have some lacerations. Now, I'll give you a recap of those events and share with you the information received from the UK police about the incident, which they refuse to either confirm or deny. Now, the man was in his 60s and he was employed as a beater for one of the local shoots between 2-3 p.m. in the afternoon. On the last drive, one of the birds that had been shot was outstanding. They hadn't found it. So the beater and his dog went back in to the woodland to get that bird. They retraced the steps they'd just made. Now, under normal circumstances, this should have taken no more than, say, 10 to 15 minutes at the most. And he had a trained retriever with him, but he didn't have a gun. When he didn't return, people became concerned and began searching the area for him, but there was no sign of him. His family made posts about his disappearance and shared them on Facebook asking for help. And by 8 p.m, some 5 hours later, the police were stationed on the outside of the woodland, along with some of the shoot members who had been asked to stay. And they never went into the wood to search for him. They simply kept other people from entering the woodland. Then the family's Facebook postings were removed that very night, even though at the point they were removed, he hadn't yet been found. Around 11 a.m. the following day, which would have been the Sunday, paramedics were in attendance in the field to the roadside of Springwood. Now, the missing man was either found dead on site or he died in hospital later that day, but he had no other injuries other than noticeable lacerations. Now, the locals spoke about it between themselves, but there had been no official statement made. If his death was an accident, then surely that would have been stated, even reported in the local newspaper. But it wasn't. If he took his own life, you'd think the same would apply. One local man who lived quite close to the woodland stated that there were upwards of 30 police officers out that night, and the man was found in an area that could have been easily searched. Meaning he was out there all night and into the next day before he was found. Why didn't they search that wood? Now, when this chap went over to the police to see if they needed any assistance, he realised that the firearms squad were involved due to the missing man being an experienced shooter. But he didn't have his gun with him that day. The woodland's very small, so he has no idea how it was even possible to go missing there. Other than the police presence, you wouldn't have known anything was happening or that anything was wrong. The police did do a house-to-house check to see if anyone had seen him, but nobody had. And nobody knows what happened with his dog. Now, the man who was the head of the shoot had made a report some months earlier after coming face-to-face with what he described as a large black cat. The wood in question is stocked for shoots, and there's a large pen where the birds are raised, and it's an area used by people for that reason. He said on the day that he saw the cat, it was in thick brambles, and they looked at each other, and he held himself together and walked past it. So we know that a large cat has been spotted in the area. And I know of some other reports, because I have them on my map, all mentioning a large black cat. In fact, there are several reports in all of the counties of large black cats not native to the UK, and the sightings are increasing. I find this case baffling, so I applied under the Freedom of Information Request laws for information held by the Constabulary that pertains to this case. I specifically asked if they could confirm that the incident with the man happened, and for information on the deceased man. I applied 3 times in all, and it was only on the third request that I received a response. And it states quite clearly that, and I quote, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary are neither willing to confirm nor deny that it holds information with regards to the specific investigation. Any confirmation or denial that information were or were not held may jeopardise future investigation measures or any associated legal case. And although we recognise a general benefit in confirmation or denial in the importance of transparency overall, we do not consider it appropriate to confirm or deny that information. Unquote. Now, I did a follow-up with another request for information on any large cats or strange animals or cryptid reports that have happened in the Brigstock area or around Springwood. And I was advised by Hampshire Police that it would cost over £400 to make that search happen. So, I think my next move is to submit individual reports for the years either side of the event happening and see if that will garner any information. So I'm thinking if I ask for the year before and I stick with just the area of Brigstock and Springwood, we may get an answer back because that would be just one search. Now, I can't understand why it costs around about £500 because basically you would just be putting the search words large cat, Brigstock, Springwood, and see what comes back with that. Now, if they're saying there isn't a large amount of cat reports, then that should be a very quick process. Unless there are many large cat reports, too many for them to report. I don't know. I don't work for the Freedom of Information, but I do find it really concerning that it took me 3 goes to actually get a mention at all. When I submitted the Freedom of Information request for the incident on the man that had gone missing and was found dead with lacerations, I thought that if that case hadn't happened, it would be a really simple, no, we have no knowledge on this. We do not know, that this event took place. But that wasn't what they said. They said they would neither confirm nor deny it because the information they have on it could be used at a later date in the criminal case, which tells me that that man disappeared and was found in unusual circumstances. Or it would have been really easy to just deny it and say, no, negative, this didn't happen. Or I thought what would happen is we'd get the usual, normally when I submit a Freedom of Information request, I get a return back saying, that it wasn't in the coroner's interest to release the information, or they didn't think it was in the public interest to release the information. So that's what I was expecting, but I was not expecting we, refuse to deny or confirm that this event took place. It's the same with the big cats, and it'd be really easy for them to look and check. I mean, newspaper reports is where I found them, so it's not that hard. They're out there on the internet. But that is the powers that be, and how they are. So that was our first case. And as you can see from the Freedom of Information request, I didn't get very far. But I haven't given up. I'm going to keep going. There'll be a loophole. I'll find a door and I'll get in there. So for our second case tonight, we are going to hear of local tales of feral people who roamed the barren fells. Now, I must tell you before I do this report, every one of us, don't they? We have this weird fear and we don't understand what it is. Well, I can put my weird fear of wild people down to the thing that I saw when I was 15. And if any of you are X-Files watchers, you'll remember one episode where there were feral people, wild people, that lived in the woodlands, and they would come out of tree trunks or up from a leaf pile and they'd grab humans and take them away and eat them, which is awful. It's very much like the Sawney Bean tale in Scotland. But that, I can't watch that episode. It absolutely freaks me out. It's the idea that you can be walking through a woodland and that woodland clearing that's a stump of, loads of old stumps or some old moss or where they drag the blackberries could literally be hiding a feral person that is a cannibal in some way. And what if those feral people are what we're mixing up with Bigfoots? Well, that's for a whole other podcast. But let's have a listen to what one of my listeners sent in. I thought it was bloody brilliant. So she said, I recently stumbled on your podcast and I just wanted to say how much I've been enjoying it. The stories and encounters which you share really strike a chord with me. Listening to them reminded me of something from my own past that I thought might interest you. When I was a little girl in the 1950s, we used to travel up from the city of Manchester to visit my grandmother, who lived in a small village near Shap in Cumbria. And it was a long journey in those days, but I always looked forward to it. The area was, and still is, incredibly remote and wild. And I remember the sense of isolation you felt there, especially once you left the main roads behind. My grandmother had a way of telling stories, half in jest, half in warning, that has stayed with me after all those years. She used to speak of wild and feral people who roamed the barren fells, especially in the more desolate parts of the Lake District. And according to her, they lived off the land, taking farmers' sheep and stealing the odd crop, avoiding all contact with villages, and were said to have been there for generations. My grandmother claimed that the local farmers and shepherds sometimes saw strange figures in the distance, or they would find signs of someone or something moving through the farm and off up into the hills at night. As a child, those stories both terrified and fascinated me. I can still picture her sitting by the fire with me and my brother. Whether they were old folk tales and local legends or something she truly believed, I'll never know. But they stayed with me ever since. Your podcast brought that all rushing back, and I thought I'd reach out and share it with you. Perhaps it's just another piece of old Cumbrian lore, or perhaps there's something more to it. Either way, thank you for the work you do in gathering and preserving these strange and mysterious accounts. Now, I say it often, don't I? But it never gets old for me. It doesn't matter how many reports I take. Each time a new one comes in, I still get the same excitement. And as I read through the account, my brain's clicking on patterns. So, what season it was, what the moon phase was that time of the year. Are there any other reports in the area? Oh, I've heard a similar report and worked that case from a different area. So all these thoughts are going through my mind as I'm doing it. But there's just something about the idea of wild people that really creeps me out. Maybe it's primal, I once watched a documentary and it was on crows and it was absolutely fascinating. And I think it was done by some big universities like Harvard or something like that in America. And one of the professors was put on a troglodyte mask, like an old, so he looked like a caveman. Normal clothes, out on the campus, but this mask. And when he wore the mask, these crows that had never seen a troglodyte, because remember, crows don't live for millions of years, do they? Would instantly start to alarm. Well, that is a genetic memory. So they see that shape of face, that style and description, is a threat to them as a whole. So once we were all wild people, weren't we? As I'm making this podcast today, I am literally staying in a very small shed in the middle of nowhere with no electricity and no water and no Wi-Fi. And it's absolutely wonderful. I'm actually up in Penrith at the moment with Mark. But I thought while I was here, I'd do the audio and I could upload it when we get home. Sheep are in the field. I'll put some photographs up for you on YouTube so you can see it. Absolutely beautiful place. It's an old shepherd's hut. So at night when the dark comes, I think of every single report I've ever heard from around that area. And I'm sat central to a number of reports that kind of surround where I am at the time. But it's Appleby Fair time, so me and Mark decided to take the week off. And that's what we've done. It's been absolutely wonderful. But when you hear this on Saturday, I'll already be back. So in our next case, it's been shared with us by a lady, and she's making a report on behalf of a friend, really. Do you remember the old saying that all of us have enough life experiences to write at least one book? Which I find to be true, to be honest. So many people have unusual experiences, or they know of someone who has. Recounting those tales is vital, or they slip into obscurity. And our witness said, thank you, for saving these stories, because that's what I don't want to happen. I don't want those stories to just fade into obscurity. I really think that we should be sharing this information, you know. So our next witness, I'm going to give the pseudonym of Kay, as she wishes to remain anonymous, and that's absolutely fine with me. Kay said, as I've said, Deb, I've always planned to write a book one day about my experiences. But between one thing and another, life got in the way. I never did get around to it. Firstly, this testimony is from 1992, 93, and it's not even mine. I've never even met the guy, but it had quite an effect on me at the time and over the years. I've been having experiences since I was a baby, well before I could walk or talk, and I still vividly remember the frustration, crying hysterically because I couldn't let my parents know what had happened. So these stories will be quite tame to my other experiences. But since I've been listening to your YouTube channel, I've been feeling guilty about keeping all of this information to myself. My stories do seem to snowball though. And even though this werewolf story isn't mine, I have had 4 black dog experiences, and at least one of them is definitely connected to this incident, in my mind anyway. The other 2 black dog experiences, I now think, were encounters with black shuck, and I've only come to realise this in the last few weeks or so. Now I have the information at hand. Anyway, this is the werewolf Dogman story from a bloke I never met many, many years ago now. So back then I was about 20 years old. I should have written it all down in a diary, and then I could have found you the exact date. I was staying the night at a friend's house, and at some point her mum had come home. And when she came in, she had such a look of shock on her face, and my friend and I were immediately concerned. I thought she'd had a bump in the car, or a run-in with her ex or something like that. But it wasn't anything like that at all. It was something far scarier. When she told us what had happened and that a friend had seen a werewolf, me and my friend just collapsed, we thought it was really funny. And the more she tried to convince us, the worse you know. In fact, she didn't try to convince us. She told us what he said and then just sat quietly until we asked her another question. I've never seen her like this, and I think that's why I still remember it quite clearly. She'd known this guy for years and she trusted him. She said he would never make up something like this. She was completely freaked out by it. This guy said he had seen a werewolf cross the road and then it had jumped onto the graveyard wall before disappearing. Well, of course, my first thought was that it was a bloke dressed up, messing about. Jumping into the graveyard felt way too convenient for me. After much taking of the piss, I asked why did this bloke believe he'd seen a werewolf and not someone in a costume taking a shortcut home from a fancy dress party. She answered that there was no way a human could have made that jump onto the wall. Now, no way. It was effortless, unnatural. And to be honest, a few of my hairs stood up when she said that. I'm no stranger to the supernatural. I've had lots of experiences myself. Everything from my dreams coming true, premonitions, and ghosts and aliens and more. But werewolves seemed too out there, even for me. My thoughts were at the time, if werewolves existed, well, they must be hidden. There must be a hidden entity. Otherwise, we'd all know about them. They would try hard not to be seen, surely. I felt like if a werewolf had crossed this road, then he would have known, smelled, sensed a human watching him, or at least know that one was in the vicinity. It just didn't quite make sense. It seemed ridiculous. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake this off as a prank. I'd seen many unexplainable weird things, so why not this? Why would this guy tell people when he knows he will be mocked? He must have been 100% certain. At this point, I'm going to interject. Once you accept that Dogman or werewolves or Bigfoot or any other entity is real, you've put that thought out there into the universe, and it can trigger, almost like a hitchhiker effect, a visitation by said creature. And I believe that's what's happened to the witness in this case, because soon after, maybe a week or two, maybe more, she said, I went to Ervig, which is an old country manor estate owned now by the National Trust, with a couple of friends. It was late, it was still light, and the werewolf memories didn't even occur to me till we were there. I honestly don't know if I just thought about it or if I talked about it. I just remember that while that was in my head, one of my friends asked, what the hell's that? I looked, and way across the field was a big black something. We couldn't figure it out at first. We deduced it was a dog, but we've never seen one that large before. Someone said we should leave it, but I remember saying that a dog that big would have to have an owner close by, and we should just wait a bit for them to come along. But it was far away, so there was no rush, there was nothing to worry about. It was only much later I realised this sequence of events didn't make sense, because we stood in silence, watching this dog walking towards us. It was for a few minutes, and we stood there frozen, not saying a word. The dog was walking slowly, very passively, with its head down, and it was making a beeline for us. In normal circumstances, I would have definitely walked slowly away. I was scared of big animals. I knew how to act around them. But for some reason, we just stood there. It got to about 10 foot in front of us and then stood on its hind legs and continued to walk towards us. And I swear it was making eye contact with me. The weird thing was, the way it moved onto its hind legs, it didn't seem like what a normal dog would do. You know, even though I've had no experience of a dog doing this, it just didn't fit. It was a slow move, and there was no misstep. In fact, it was so natural, it looked unnatural, if that makes sense. When it looked at me, I felt it telling me to run. And I shouted run, and boy did we run. Now there's no way normally I would run away from a dog, especially a dog of that size. It's the opposite of what you should do. The whole experience didn't make sense after I'd processed it. I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember looking back or anything, but I knew it was connected to that werewolf. I just knew it was. This experience made me believe, but I couldn't really tell you why. Many years later, I'm guessing I was what, mate, I went into Waterstones and I saw a book on Weird Wrexham and a chapter about the Wrexham werewolf stood out. I must admit I was gutted. It wasn't a modern sighting, but yeah, it added another layer to my thinking. And then, years after that, was when I became a latecomer to the internet. I searched many things I'd experienced. I'd experienced many crazy things, so the werewolf and the black dogs were quite far down my list, you know. But when I did the research, I was gutted to find the black shuck. I instantly knew that the dog I'd seen was not a devil dog. I think it had been protective, 100%. Years later, I came across your YouTube channel, and there was a one episode when you were talking about werewolves being connected to graveyards, waterways, and like ancient land. I can't quite remember which one it was, but in that moment, I thought, yes. It was maybe a couple of years after that when something triggered me. I phoned my friend whose mum informed us, of the werewolf all those years ago. I wanted to talk to the man who'd seen it, and she asked her mum, but we found out that he died. I have more information that I found out about the land. It all snowballs. But I feel if I don't send this email now, I never will. There were so many things in this account that kind of lit a light bulb for me. The way that the animal moved fluidly, the fact that it was down on all fours and it raised up onto two. Now that animal told her to run. Did it do that to so that it could, chase them down and kill them? Or did it do that to move them from the area because something far worse was coming? I mean, we don't know, do we? But it didn't hurt them. It told them to run. And it let them, It's very, very hard to explain, but that witness will understand it completely. So she also mentioned a couple of things kind of resonated, and one was the way it kept its gaze on that witness throughout the event and the area it was experienced in, along with the question, why did it show itself in the first place when it would have clearly known a human being was around? So let's cover the first point. The werewolf either showed itself on purpose, didn't it? It meant to be seen for an agenda unknown to us, or it didn't know or care that there was a human in the vicinity when it jumped that wall. Because the creature that the kids seen years later was definitively a werewolf, wasn't it? And when you consider the very size and bulk and speed of these creatures, they clearly have nothing to fear from a human being, especially young ones who have no weapons or any real way of fighting back or fighting it off. I have heard from many people now that the creature they saw held their gaze. In fact, in some cases, they felt compelled to keep eye contact. And while doing so, they were rooted to the spot. In ancient times, we call this the glimmer, and the Fae were said to be masters at it. And the account takes place next to a church property. And many of our churches are built on our very first holy sites. Which brings us to the churchyard and the burials within it. People often see dog-like creatures in close proximity to graveyards and burial mounds. And it doesn't seem to matter whether those burial grounds are old or new. So accounts like that take place in modern cemeteries, but they will also take place in a place like Castle Ring in Cannock Chase, so an ancient monument that's been built around about 800 years ago that we don't understand the significance of. So it could be a couple of things, couldn't it? It could be that that place has an energy that attracts that cryptid in, or emits something like a magnet in some way that pulls the activity to that area. It could be the witness themselves that walk into an area and suddenly, like a catalyst, an experience happens, and you kind of see through that tear in the veil. There's many theories behind what they are and how we see them. And if I went through them all, we'd be here all night, wouldn't we? But keeping of the gaze. I remember Fred saying that the night he saw a werewolf at the window. He said its eyes were mesmerising. They kind of kept him there. Almost like that creature was reading your soul, finding your inner thoughts and intentions. And I've heard that from a lot of witnesses over the years, that this gaze, almost, what we call a glimmer. People used to call, when they faded it, they called it the glimmer. But that glimmer also fits with other activity that isn't Fae-like. So like Bigfoot reports, Dogman reports, UFO alien reports. So we are often, we mention this glimmer, this predator type being that moves through the woodland. And many people believe that that is a Dogman or a Bigfoot that's cloaked in some way. I don't want to do that because that's putting two theories together and making five, isn't it? Unless I see that happen with my own eyes, there's nothing I can do to kind of bring that across to you. I think it's a being of its own, an entity, whatever name you want to give it. Because people talk about it moving through, say, long grass. You can see the grass moving. but not what is running through that grass. Same, people have seen it going up trees and onto branches, over walls, across roads. So the same kind of activity as a cryptid, but in this prismatic, predator-type way. We use the word predator because of the film, because that did a very good depiction of what these beings actually look like. And it's impossible for me to come up with them to show you in AI, and that's why I haven't tried. I can tell you what the witnesses say, though. They see something moving, they can hear it. They can sometimes, if it's snow covered, they can see the footsteps actually walking towards them, but not the being that's making those steps. That's absolutely terrifying. It's bad enough seeing an 8-foot cryptid in a woodland, but for something to stalk you out of that wood that you can't see must be absolutely terrifying. I don't care who you are, whether you're army trained or not. Seeing that in a woodland when it's not supposed to happen was bring all manner of trauma with it. One of the places we stayed on our week off was an area called Hampshire, in Lancashire, in the northwest of England. And Hampshire has an account that sounds exactly like these predator beings. And it was actually my dad that took it. My dad had a market stall, and he worked all over Lancashire. And one of the lads that he used to work with was homeless. He'd come out of the army and he just couldn't hold it together in a flat or anything like that. And he just bunked out. He went into the woods and he went wild. He had a tent, he had his dog with him. And he said that for a number of nights when he stayed out there, it was absolutely fine. He thought he had the best camp ever. He was near good water, no humans coming by, absolutely happy. And then something would start to come into the camp at night. Now, he couldn't see it. He could feel it as it moved against the tent, and he could hear it moving brush as it walked around the tent. His dogs, which were staffy pit crosses and scared of nothing, would cower in that tent when this was happening. And it became so much of a nightly routine that he packed up and he left and went back into the city. And it was actually my dad who gave him a property to live in. So it's a weird, strange way that I've got the story, but my dad is one of those people who will say to people, have you ever had anything weird happen? Because, I used to see ghosts and stuff like that. He's very open about it, my dad was. And that's why this Alan, his name was, opened up to him. I wonder where he is. I'd love to bump into him again. My dad passed in 2018, so I don't have any contact with him. But yeah, I'd love to know if he was still in the city or he'd gone back out there, because he was absolutely traumatised. But that's understandable, isn't it? And I've featured those cases a number of times. And now I'd like to share some of the reports that have been made via YouTube comments on my Patreon site whenever I share these stories. And no matter how many reports I take, as I said, it never gets old or bothersome. Each and every new report, even with limited information, gets the old cogs moving for me. It adds to the info on that area, and it enables us to see patterns, as we can in the first 2 cases tonight. Not only are we saying, that this happened, we believe you, we understand, we are also saving these accounts from disappearing in time. We're also building up a database of valuable information surrounding encounters like these. Now, Dave Bowen said, a local farmer that I know said one of the lads he worked with saw a werewolf or a dogman on Denby Moor in the early 1980s. The lad was a bit of an hard nut, apparently, and he had this experience in the daytime. And he was crying hysterically for about 20 minutes before he could describe what had happened. There was no physical contact from the creature, but he was absolutely terrified. I was told this by the farmer, who's a relative, on Christmas Day, probably 83, 84, roughly. Now, the area where this happened, Denby Moor, does have other cryptid reports, and some of them are historical. One man was convinced by his local cleric that the creature he saw was the devil himself. Now, we often see the satanic panic when cryptids are seen around churches and graveyards, aren't we? And as I say, this is an historical account. It was taken in 1887. This account is called The Hairy Hand of Mossley Hill. There was a book written in 1887, and it was by a Welsh chap called Elias Owen. And he told in that book the following tale, and it was related to him by a Reverend Jones near Codderhill, I think it is. I think that's how you pronounce it. The young chap was called Richard Roberts, and he was a young man who worked in Flintshire. And instead of going to a place of worship on a Sunday morning, he got into the habit of wandering about the fields foraging. One fine autumn Sunday, he was determined to go a nutting, their words, not mine, when he came to a wood where nuts were plentiful. And in a short time, he'd filled his pockets with them. But perceiving a bush loaded with nuts, he put out his hand to draw a branch down to him, when he observed a hairy hand stretching towards the same branch. As soon as he saw this hand, he was terribly frightened, and without turning round to see anything further of it, he took to his heels, and never afterwards did he venture to go a nutting on a Sunday. Now, Richard Roberts told the tale to the rector, who did try and convince him that it was merely a monkey in the bush, but later affirmed that Satan had come to him for missing church. Now, I think the moral of this tale is be really careful when you're out nutting in the woods. So, a person called Molcra, the thing with YouTube names, isn't it? They're really hard. They made a comment on one of my videos and they said, I'm so glad I heard this video. And now I know I wasn't imagining what happened to me. It was about 4 years ago. I was driving late at night down the A68 towards Otterburn. And whilst going through Northumberland National Park, I felt like I was being stalked. At one point, there were temporary lights on the road, which was where I felt something was about to happen to me as I actually waited for them. Luckily, they changed and I drove off. And once I was out of the park, the feeling lifted. The strange thing is, 30 minutes later on my way back, about 1 a.m, I didn't have any feeling at all. There was a case in Stableford during COVID where a lady was out late one night walking the dog about 1 in the morning because it was really, really hot. And she pulled up at a set of temporary traffic lights and saw what she at first thought was a huge shire horse. It was that big, moving from the woodland and into the road and across off into another set of woods. So she put the car lights on it, thinking it was a horse that had got out and was on the farm lane. And it wasn't. It was this creature that she actually drew what it looked like. And it was an upright wolf. It was a wolf that was walking upright on two legs. And that was absolutely terrifying for her. And she said she couldn't get the car windows up close quick enough and she drove off at speed. And I think that's quite natural. Somebody called Black Shuck left me the comment saying, my father was in the Marines and he and others were deployed to Exmoor in the 80s due to the amount of livestock being killed there. They were told it was a big cat, but he never believed it was from the carnage that was left behind by this predator. Ugh. So, speaking of predators, our last report tonight centres around the invisible beings, also known as the predator type, a moving, prismatic energy, something that moves effortlessly throughout the woods. It's a subject that we mentioned many times in the comments, as I've said earlier, and I've added those reports here together to show you that just those similarities. Mercury said, I've had several encounters with the predator-type creatures in my life. They seem to spend a lot of time sitting up in trees. They can run up to 50 miles an hour. I would estimate from what I'd seen. They keep their young up in trees with them. They do take sheep, particularly around late spring, to feed themselves and their young. They are also partial to pregnant ewes. They are meat eaters, and they breed as I've seen their young. They'll take anything from a full-grown ewe to a squirrel. They have run up behind me twice during daylight hours, but never at night. They're telepathic and can read or hear our thoughts. They've never bothered me, despite being close to me on many occasions in the woods during darkness and daylight. I did not believe in them until I saw them sitting up in a tree one day. I got the feeling they wanted to see me, and I wanted to see them, and so I knew that they were there. They'll watch and follow you, but generally leave you alone unless they don't want you around. British Bigfoot are similar in behaviour and will investigate your campsite around 3, maybe 4 in the morning. A UK Dogman is more unpredictable, and if you ever saw one of those, you'd never go there again. Yvonne Marshall said, I've come to thinking after listening to terrifying encounters that dogmen can cloak themselves just like the predator in the film. They've been seen being followed in grassland, and you can see the grass moving forward, following them, but not them. It's been terrifying for the man hiking or hunting that have witnessed this. I came across Vic Cunliffe's channel in 2015, and I was shocked to hear an encounter on his channel of an Air Force pilot who saw it as a boy, 12 years of age. He was walking along a well-known path with his military dad, who was with his friend, and it was dark. There was a big full moon that night. A dogman looked at him from behind a big pine tree, and he described it as resembling a werewolf. He ran forward to his dad, who was walking ahead of him, but he didn't tell his dad what had happened. That night he had terrible nightmares. His mum and dad were very worried, and he told them what he saw, and they did believe that he saw something terrifying. As he grew up, the fear never left him. He never camped and only hiked with someone there alongside him. Here in Cornwall, I've heard banging on my walls, and my dogs were absolutely terrified. And they're big dogs, and they're afraid of nothing. They wouldn't go out, and they stood in front of me to stop me from going out there. The hackles were up, they were growling, all 3 of them. That was enough for me. I made sure everything was locked up and the curtains closed. I'm surrounded by farms, streams, woodlands, fields, and we're about 45 miles from Bodmin Moor. I thought it was something passing through, as I've never heard that banging again, and the dogs have been okay. Then a few weeks ago, I opened my bedroom window, as I love listening to the tawny owls that go in the ash tree in the garden, and to my shock, I heard howling. It was about 2:30 a.m. I know it wasn't a dog, it was a deep howling, so I closed the window. I know dogmen can lay low to the ground and climb high buildings and, go up into trees. They're out there day and night. Sparklehorse said, this is exactly what I've seen here on the Scottish borders and in the Highlands. I've actually come up close with the Predator film pixelated kind of space thing. I'm not even sure how to describe it. The feeling you get when they're around is similar to being on an airplane and you're going through turbulence. I guess because that's exactly what it is. Turbulence is you are coming up against a dimensional shift. What you shared, Deb, is absolutely spot on with my experiences. They live right by me. They read your mind. They know your intentions. The predator cloaking is something I see constantly by the riverbank. I don't want to give out my location, but my gut feeling with them is that as long as you're not some trigger happy, hooray Henry twat, running around with a shotgun, calling it a sport, you'll be okay. Unless you get in its way during a hunt. I would agree with that. I would say that most people believe that all animals, creatures are positive in some way, and that's just not the case, And it might be that creature is, and we do something that triggers a response. So if they got young near them, or maybe they were sick or ill or something, and we go bounding in there, all dressed in camo with kit that looks like guns and stuff, then you're not going to get like this lovely, kind of exchange, are you? Any animal cornered, human beings included, will fight for their lives to get out, Mrs. Kent Scott said, Hi Deb, my son's just told me a fact that you might be interested in. Joel Hynek is a Hollywood specials effects director, and he created the design of the Predator's camouflage effect for the film, and he won an Academy Award for that. Joel is the son of J. Allen Hynek, who originated the close encounter hierarchy for categorising interactions with aliens. Dr. Hynek was a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University and was also the director of Project Blue Book for the US military. Maybe Joel, who grew up during the time his father was head of Blue Book, was privy to his father's classified information. Stay safe. Leanne, New Hampshire, USA. And then we have a comment left by Check the Skies. I told the story of my childhood, and on 2 separate occasions the story of my friends that saw a huge man with green skin in 1989. I was told that I was a fantasist and that green men just didn't exist in real life, only on churches and old mythological stories. I said, why would anyone just wake up and decide just to make all this up? I was there. I saw their faces when they told the story. Their eyes, reactions, stuttering speech of terrified friends that got up close to it when it snapped a branch. Now, after looking into the subjects of cryptozoology, cryptids and more, it's possible that the green man could have semi-transparent or translucent type skin. And this has been reported by professional people, given their names, location, testimony, and details in the thousands by now. The Predator movie-style camouflage has been seen many, many times. So strange that people think they know everything in this world, and never mind any overlapping worlds we cannot see in our visual spectrum. The world is so much more than we can see with just our eyes. No Cash said, when I saw it, it looked a bit like a special effect from the Predator film, but on a much lower budget. More like a dense pillar of mist. If not for the other activity going on in the areas, I'd have thought it was a ghost. In actual fact, when I was looking at it, trying to figure it out, I thought, well, that's the ghost. But it wasn't. I know it wasn't a ghost because it used a recycle unit as a safety barrier between us. It was peeking over the top of it, and then it rose to what I presume was full height. No fear, just a mutual curiosity, I think. Spooky Electric said, I've heard many similar accounts on David Powell-Idy's channel of almost invisible, shimmering type beings that many described as looking like the alien creature in Predator or the Glimmer Man. Absolutely terrifying, but I can't even imagine what these beings are. I know an author called Steph Young wrote of these beings, and she called them an invisible predator in the woods, which is fascinating reading if you want to read it. Bone Nut said, the Glimmer Man cloaked cryptids. There was a curious case where a suspected Dogman killed a deer, and the carcass was put in front of a trail cam. A localised mist came in on camera around the deer, and the mist left, and the carcass was gone. So they can cloak, turn into kind of compressed energy forms like orbs and mists. AB said, for anyone who wants to know about these Glimmerman beings and needs to listen to Mark and Barton interview on Bigfoot Odyssey, these beings hunted him and were about to kill him, but through an act of God, he was able to save himself. He gave him PTSD, and he will not go towards any woods anymore. In the interview, you'll be able to tell how messed up this incident made him, the fear he felt. He was a Bigfoot researcher in Florida at the time. That's how these beings found him. These beings are called Zetas, or Zetas, I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, and they are a hybrid race of beings who were given our national forest to hunt people. They are partly responsible for some of the missing 411s. They are the fourth dimensional beings who are very evil, and they are cloaked most of the time, and they're in the hills and in the forest. Oh, can you imagine opening the front door and something like that was in your garden and you're kind of in the middle of nowhere? I don't care, even if you was in the city and you experienced something like that, it'd be absolutely terrifying. And I've taken reports of people who've seen them in cities, or alongside roadways or down near the river, or, when they've been driving the car or the van. I wish I knew just how many of these reports are out there in the UK. I'd love to compile them all together in one place and just see just how many people have experienced them. But for tonight, let's bring it to an end now. And I will see you all guys in 2 weeks' time as we get older and more accounts come in. I'm finding it really hard to keep up with the pace of weekly YouTube. So I think just for the next couple of months while I have a bit of a break and get ready to tie things up, I will only be releasing a video once every 2 weeks. But I will do a live stream at some point during the weeks where I'm not on. So, you will be seeing me. I've got a lot of shorts to put out and small things on there on YouTube. So if you're listening on the podcast, pop over to YouTube and subscribe. And we would really appreciate that. And then you won't miss out on any of the new things we've not got coming. So until 2 weeks' time, I will be back at the same time, at the same day. Good night, everyone.